Welcome to the Long Thread podcast about spinning, stitching, and weaving by hand. The podcast is presented by Long Thread Media, publishers of Spin-Off, Handwoven, Piecework, and Little Looms magazines. Find us online at longthreadmedia.com. Trinway Silks is where weavers, spinners, knitters, and stitchers find the silk they love. Select from the largest variety of silk spinning fibers, silk yarn, and silk threads and ribbons at trinwaysilks.com. You'll discover a rainbow of colors thoughtfully hand-dyed in Colorado. Love natural? Trinway's array of wild silks provide choices beyond white. If you love silk, you'll love Trinway Silks, where superior quality and customer service are guaranteed. I'm your host, Long Thread Media co-founder Ann Merrow. Curtis Gregory is a park ranger with the George Washington Carver National Monument near Diamond, Missouri. You might wonder why a fiber art podcast is interviewing a park ranger about an agricultural scientist, but as you'll hear, there's much more to George Washington Carver than we learned in school. So Curtis, thanks so much for being with me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having us.
So you are a park ranger at the George Washington Carver Monument. Can you tell me a little bit about the site and what you do there?
Okay, yes. Again, well, on behalf of the National Park Service, thank you for having me today. So yes, I'm a park ranger at George Washington Carver National Monument, which is a part of the National Park Service. And we're located in southwest Missouri in a little town called Diamond, Missouri. And the site is where George Washington Carver was born and where he lived for about the first 12 years of his life. And so the site interprets his entire life. So we have a visitor center, walking trails, the area where Carver was born, and a wonderful visitor center all dedicated to a wonderful man. And what's interesting about the site is the site was actually established in 1943. So we're the first Park Service site in the system dedicated to an African American in 1943. So in July, we'll be celebrating 83 years of the George Washington Carver National Monument. Wow.
And the thing about George Washington Carver, and I keep wanting to say Dr. Carver as an acknowledgement of his accomplishments, but his accomplishments were not only academic, and he didn't actually ever have a doctorate. Is that right?
No, he didn't have a doctorate. He had several honorariums, but he didn't have a PhD.
But I keep wanting to call him Dr. Carver because of everything he accomplished. And I think it says right on the Park Service website something about more than just peanuts.
Right.
George Washington Carver, he has this, he's well known among, elementary school students, but only for one thing.
Only for one thing. Most people know him for his work with the peanuts. And, it's interesting that you mentioned that because a lot of our visitors that come to the visitor center, the first thing that they say, oh, I love peanut butter, I love peanuts. And, you have to break it down to him a little bit. Well, he didn't invent peanut butter, but I'm sure he came up with his own version of peanut butter. But yeah, you're right. Most people that know of George Washington Carver know of the work with peanuts. But as you may know, and visitors learn when they come to the park, that there's so many more things that he did. He was an educator, an agricultural scientist, an artist, and really a humanitarian, so a musician. So there were so many more things than, as we say, just the peanut.
And the reason that we're speaking about this on the Long Thread podcast, which is about fiber arts, is that many people wouldn't realize that George Washington Carver, in both personal and his professional work, was actually quite involved with textile work. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah, he was very much involved, especially some of his textile work and some of the things that some people say he could have learned here when he was living with Moses and Susan Carver. And really, I forgot to mention that the reason that the park is here, and forgive me, is because Moses and Susan Carver came here in the 1830s, and they had a working farm. And in 1855, they purchased one enslaved girl by the name of Mary. And Mary, as a result of that, she had at least two children that we know of. George had an older brother, Jim, and George was born here on this property. And so sometimes, and George's father, we believe, was another enslaved individual who died in an accident before George was born. So sometimes at the end of the Civil War, George and his mother were abducted or taken from the Carver farm, and the only one that was recovered was George. And so George was brought back to the Carver farm. And to this day, no one really knows what happened to Mary. Was she sold deeper in the South, or was she killed? It's like she just kind of disappeared. And so then George was brought back to the Carver farm and lived with Moses and Susan until he was at least 12, and he wanted to get an education. So that's why he really journeyed away from the farm for an education. But some people think that he may have learned some of those early skills from Susan Carver. It's possible that he may have learned some of those early skills from Susan Carver, as well as when he left the Carver farm and went to a little town called Neosho, where he went to school at, that he also probably learned some of those from a lady by the name of Mariah Watkins, who was very dear to him as well. So it kind of started early in his life with some of those arts. Then, of course, many visitors, or maybe some of your listeners may not know that when on his journey for an education, his first love was art, which we believe he learned at the Carver farm, painting in the woods and things of that sort. And then when he went off to where he went to Simpson College, and he first majored in art at Simpson College, and then he changed career directions and for more of the sciences, and transferred to what is now Iowa State University. And then from there, he went to Tuskegee in 1896. And so while he was at Tuskegee, he participated and dabbled in all sorts of different arts, fiber arts. Carver often said he never wasted anything. And so he would just take different materials and create. So he's very much involved in the fibers, I would say almost his entire life. And Tuskegee in Alabama, Tuskegee National Historic Site, has a wonderful collection of some of Carver's works.
And I've seen pictures of some of them. These just incredible swatches and rooms worth of knitting and crochet, and especially crochet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so much. He would say things like, and which wasn't uncommon for the time period, especially in the 30s or so, that he would say a ball of twine that was crumbled up was ignorance. But he would say pieces of string and things that were laid out is intelligence. Because he would say, if you just throw it in a drawer or something like that, you're wasting, and he would always use different string or whatever he could find to make rugs and all sorts of things. Some of the things is just so incredible that and for that time period, a lot of people didn't waste, but Carver seemed to go to the extreme somewhat.
And was that just for his personal use, or I thought I remembered that he, often taught other folks how to transform found objects into something that would make their homes more beautiful. Do I remember that correctly?
Yes, he did that all the time. Matter of fact, in 19, I was pulling out some information. In 1938, he spoke to the Tuskegee's Women's Club, and the title of his presentation was "An Hour with Rags and Strings." And he would show these women. He said, for example, quote, he said, "I had at least 30 pieces on exhibition consisting of rugs, carpets, and various types of weavings, many types of fibers, etc. Many of the things that we now throw away. The entire exhibition did not cost 5 cents, as everything, including the needles which the different things were made." So he teach people about how to not waste anything.
And the materials that he was using were kind of interesting. When I think about textiles, I often think about weaving, and he's doing more, at least what we've talked about so far, are more looped items, things that you can carry with you. And
right.
then, yeah. And then when I think about materials, of course, When I'm thinking about the South, I'm often thinking of cotton, but that's not what he was focusing on.
No, it didn't seem to be. I mean, I think Carver worked with cotton for sure. Like he came up with different hybrids for like for farmers and such. But in his work, he seemed for some of his work, some of his craft stuff or what have you was other things. I mean, he did use cotton stock quite a bit for some of his rugs and things, but he would just use any type of almost plant type of materials and things.
But cotton stalks, so not even the part that people were really going for. He was finding a use
Right,
for the part you'd
exactly.
thrown away. Yeah.
Right. He seemed to use quite a bit of cotton stock.
Yeah. And I was
Right.
also
Yeah.
seeing some natural dye work that he did.
Quite a bit of natural dye. And as I mentioned before, we believe that actually started here on at the what is now the park, which was the Moses Carver farm, where he learned that there's an interesting story that he had to supposedly run an errand for Mrs. Carver, and he had to go to this house, which was known as one of the fanciest houses in the little area of Diamond, and he was supposed to go to the kitchen, but he went into the living room and saw paintings for the first time. And then went back out into the wooded area, which is now the park, and he made his own natural dyes.
Mhm.
Berries, flowers, mud, as a little kid, and
Mhm.
that's what he seemed to really wanted to become as a kid here. And then in his adult life, he did a lot of work with what he called rich Alabama clay,
Hmm.
that red clay from Alabama. And many of his paintings, and he did quite a few paintings that he would often give away as gifts. And a lot of those paintings were used with that clay. And again, he used to call it rich Alabama clay. And he would also, one of his agriculture bulletins, and Carver wrote about 44 of these agriculture bulletins. And in 1911, there was one for paint stains using from clay. And this paint stain would have been like whitewash, like whitewashing. Like you could take this paint or this whitewashing and beautify your house or beautify your fence, which Carver encouraged people to do as well.
Mhm.
And he also made, as you mentioned before too, he made these paint swatches out of clay. And it had been estimated that some of these paint swatches that he had made, at least 500 or so. So I'm not sure how true that is, but he did make quite a few of these paint swatches. So the natural things and the clays are the clays are very interesting because we're fortunate enough to have one of his paintings that he gifted to someone, then they gift it back to the National Park Service that we can share with all the visitors using the clays. And he would often do these little Christmas cards, these little holiday cards, and he would paint these scenes with using the clay as well. He would write on the back about
Mhm.
this comes from Alabama clay. So it's pretty neat.
Yeah. There's sort of a theme there of, taking either discarded or ordinary things and making them beautiful.
Yeah, and he did this all of his life. Mostly, a lot of it is definitely documented at Tuskegee for sure. Like I was just telling you about that one letter, the hour of rags and a string that he was talking to the women's club about. And he would often have these like little sessions, or if he was a guest speaker, he would often talk about a lot of these things. So it was really throughout his entire life. But I know that once he gets to Tuskegee in 1896, it's definitely documented at Tuskegee for sure.
And I think that that's something that a lot of crafters and fiber artists can relate to, that need to not just make something, not just take a piece of cloth to cover yourself up, but how can we make it more beautiful? How can we make it more, have our own personality, our own stamp on it?
Sure, yes. And that's what he seemed to do quite a bit, especially in the Tuskegee area. There's a wonderful collar, a collar that Carver, forgive me, I think he knitted or crocheted. I'm not sure what it is,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a wonderful piece that he made for this lady at Tuskegee. And apparently the lady at the time, she was a young girl, and she she served his meals to him. And then later on in life, she donated to the National Park Service. It's a wonderful piece, especially with that personal connection
Hmm.
that Carver thought so much of this woman that he made this gift. And Carver would do that quite a bit. He would make these gifts and give them away to individuals and things. And we have others. We have some of Carver's paintings and some things on loan or in our permanent collection that we have on display. But yeah, our visitor center also, um, Carver would also often go to these like farming conferences or agricultural fairs, and he would set up these elaborate exhibits,
Hmm.
and he would use a lot of his fiber arts and his crafts and things to demonstrate what the average person could do,
Hmm.
and things that they could just find in their own home or in their community. And from what I understand, these exhibits were or these displays were just kind of really extraordinary. Some of the stuff that he would do, and I think about, I'm like, where does man have all this time to do all this? But I guess there was no really any TV or social media, which I'm sure
Hmm.
Carver probably would not have been a part of anyhow.
Well,
So he just found the time.
and if you sit there with nothing in your hands, if you're somebody who likes to have your hands busy, it doesn't feel right if you're not working on something.
Yes, and he loved to do that. There was this quote, and I pulled this quote out that I had found from one of the biographers that Carver talked about using their about using his hands, and he said, I never saw anybody doing anything with his hands that I couldn't do with mine. And he would supposedly watch Mariah, because Mariah was a knitter as well, and he would often supposedly watch Mariah and watch Mariah's hands and things like that. So things that he seemed to learn early in his life that he would often use his entire life.
Speaking of those agricultural displays, one of the things I've noticed is that there's a lot closer connection between textiles and agricultural work, and certainly the sources of the materials you work with would have been a lot clearer. But it sounds like it wasn't, I'm a farmer and therefore all that is women's work, or I'm out in the fields, I don't want anything indoors. It sounds like there was a lot more integration there.
Yes, very very much so. And the whole thing that to me with Carver, especially with Carver, was that he wanted to show individuals that even as people that in these rural communities, and maybe some of the poor people that he worked with, that you could still beautify your community with the little. You didn't have to have the riches. You have these things and already in your home, and you can basically work with them.
Mm-hmm.
And he seemed to, and that's one of the things that to me that it really inspires me about Carver, how he really wanted to help the man furthest down,
Mm-hmm.
just not with certainly with the farming techniques and things, but beautifying your home. You can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it was some of the neatest things a part of some of his work.
Yeah. Do you have any favorite objects of the things he made?
We have this mat on display right now that he made with, like a little dinner mat thing. I think like 1929 that he made with the cotton stock.
Mm.
And it's on. We're very fortunate that we work very well with the Tuskegee National Historic Site, and the Tuskegee National Historic Site was where Carver did most of his work or lived most of his life on that campus. They have so many objects of that sort. And they were able to loan us on long-term loan one of those mats. And it's a very, very neat, beautiful mat. As if I think he used some different types of dyes. I'm sure there probably were natural dyes, but it is one of the neatest things that we have on display for visitors to see. And it's just neat to me. It's just neat to see the work that he was doing with his hands and things, and how he would encourage others to do the same thing.
I think he was encouraging people to use what they had at hand. And I think a lot of us feel an obligation to use the materials that we find, whether it's to use less waste or have more of a connection with the earth. So I like the idea of finding inspiration in his work for what we can do in a contemporary craft world.
Right. Yes. Yes. And it seems like to me here at the park, we learned so much more, or individuals that are taking on these type of more responsibilities. And it's like, oh my gosh, that sounds like George Washington Carver.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned this mat that's on long-term loan and also the items that are in the Tuskegee collection. If our listeners want to learn more about this for themselves, how can they see it, whether in person or online?
Well, the park is open 7 days a week, 9 to 5. They can come and see some of these objects that are on display at any time, 9 to 5. Unfortunately, right now, there's nothing on display online. But our visitor center, I think we have a nice visitor center with many objects, some of the objects, as I was saying, the mat. And there's a wonderful also, I forgot to mention that we have some of Carver's paintings and some things on loan or in our permanent collection that we have on display. But yeah, our visitor center, our park is open every day, 9 to 5. We often do tours. We get a lot of education programs here. Right now, we're in our field trip season right now. We get a lot of kids here, but and we're free. There's no charge. And so we're located in Southwest Missouri in a little town outside of a little town called Diamond. And if your listeners ever get the opportunity to go to Tuskegee, Alabama, I would say go to Tuskegee. Tuskegee is a wonderful place. They have a wonderful visitor center with many more Carver objects. We're fortunate to have some of the three-dimensionals. Tuskegee has a lot more. I would say both sites are neat sites to visit if you want to learn more on George Washington Carver.
Thank you so much for telling us a little bit more about George Washington Carver. There are actually several articles on Spin-Off and Piecework magazines that I will link to in our show notes. But thanks so much for teaching us more.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for having me and the park. We really, really appreciate this. It was fun.
Thanks to our sponsors for supporting the podcast. Thank you for listening to the Long Thread podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate the show and leave us a comment on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks again.